Hi everyone, Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies here. And in this video I want to talk about a BBC documentary as part of Mental Health Awareness Week, which was shown on BBC TV, but is also on the BBC iPlayer, which I believe is available to international viewers. And the programme was called What's Wrong with Tony Slattery? And Tony Slattery was a comedian, a very talented, funny man who mixed with the much more famous, perhaps, group of people, including Kenneth Branagh, Emma Thompson and Stephen Fry. And he basically went to the same university and was in the Cambridge Footlights along with them. And he was very popular on TV in the 90s. He was in everything. His physical presence, his comedy was very physical. He was just everywhere, on adverts, on every programme. And then suddenly he disappeared and we never saw him. And this programme was an attempt to discuss what happened to him, because a lot of people assumed he'd died because he was that reclusive. But it turns out he had terrible struggles with drink and drugs during that period, which involved him actually becoming a bit of a hermit and living without contact with other people for a period of 6 months to a year. He had earned a lot of money at that point, and so he could afford cocaine, and he took a lot of it, up to 10 grams a day, which was costing him £1,500 a week, which is a lot in the mid-90s. But of course it was having a huge toll on his health, and he ended up disposing of a lot of his furniture, literally chopping it to pieces and throwing it in the Thames, because his flat bordered the Thames. And he only stopped taking the cocaine when his mum came to stay at the Millennium, where he was having a party, and she discovered one of the packets behind the sort of cushions on the sofa, and that shame that he felt triggered him to actually stop. It was one of the factors anyway. The other was that he went and got a toxicology report on the actual product he was taking and found out that only 5% of it was cocaine, and the rest was ground glass and human and animal feces. And that shocked him so much that he actually stopped taking it. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to stop taking alcohol. And these days, he is a functional alcoholic, and he can manage, but only if he drinks every day. And the programme was really aimed at showing us the effects of that kind of long-term self-abuse and what might be causing it and what sort of treatments are available. And it followed his journey from his first sort of awareness from living at home with his partner, and how his partner has to do everything, really, has to take charge of the household and organise everything, because for a large part of the day he just doesn't move. He sits on the sofa and watches TV and kind of drinks. That's what he does. And it was quite shocking to see him age 59 when the programme was made, looking at least 10 years older. I'm 56, so, and okay, I would be grey if I didn't dye my hair, but you'll see if you watch the programme, he looks an awful lot older than me. So, and it was also an attempt, I guess, to look at what drives a man to do that. And it turns out that he had suffered abuse as a boy when he was 8 from a Catholic priest. He grew up in an Irish Catholic family. He was the youngest. And we think it was serial abuse, although he couldn't actually say that. He finds it very hard to talk about. He carries an awful lot of shame and guilt, as children do, when things like that happen to them, because they don't have the cognitive ability to see the context and to understand that it is not their fault that this is happening to them. So abused people often are full of self-hatred, full of blame for themselves. Why didn't they fight back? Or why did they not tell anybody? Why didn't they stop the abuse? But it's completely impossible for an 8-year-old to run or fight or even tell anybody in those circumstances. He didn't tell his parents, for instance. And that, of course, is part of the trauma, because if you get no support for what's happened to you, if you get nobody who takes your side, you do internalize what's happened as self-blame. And then you feel tremendous shame over it. And that seems to be what's happened. And for a large part of our existence, particularly in our 20s and 30s, we can survive and we can distract ourselves with work and maybe relationships, or maybe accumulating money, or whatever it is that we do. Certain addictions often come into play there as well. You can be addicted to overwork, to sex, to shopping. Doesn't matter what your addiction is, you can distract yourself from the emotional pain that that has caused you. And that's certainly the case with Tony. He was very prolific in his 20s and 30s. But as the psychic awareness begins to bubble up, and the distractions become less compelling as you age, money, success become perhaps less important than relationship and meaning and a spiritual life. You then become more aware of your deficits, and I think that's what's happened to Tony. And he's had to drink to keep the pain at bay, the emotional pain of what happened to him. But he's totally unaware that the feelings of it being too much to talk about, or simply not important because it was so long ago. That's what he kept saying. Surely I'm being self-indulgent to think that I still carry this, age 59, when I was 8 when this happened. And it's so revealing to watch his journey as this is explained to him. Now, at first, he goes through the conventional route, which is to go to his GP, who's known him many years. And his GP is sympathetic, wants to help him, has given him in the past antidepressants, which he's still on. And he's actually had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, which is where you have periods of mania and then periods of depression. And nobody actually has asked him what caused that. And it's not till his GP recommends he go and see a colleague who is an expert in alcoholism. And he goes along to see her, and she explains that drinking is his problem. And if he has kicked cocaine, he can certainly kick drinking. Which I guess is heartening to hear, but it isn't realistic, actually, because people with psychological trauma like that fear more than anything the overwhelming nature of those memories, which are implicit in the brain. Before the age of 8 or 9, most memories are not narrative. They don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have sensations associated with them. They have feelings associated with them. So the overwhelm of sensation is what you get in a flashback. And it's absolutely intolerable. It's the basis of anxiety, actually. And so to just say, well, give up the drink, when the drink is the only thing that keeps him going, keeps him numb enough to not feel. And I felt that she was not trauma-informed, because if she had been, I think she would have viewed it slightly differently and explained it slightly differently. And anyway, he goes through the process and he tries to follow their advice, and he wants to give up the drink very badly. That's his cognitive part of his brain. But he's already tried once, and when he tried, he actually had a seizure and had to be taken to hospital. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because when you remove the numbing and the blockage, the overwhelm is likely to trigger a huge sympathetic nervous system response, which can sometimes cause extreme heart rate variations, atrial fibrillations, fainting spells, tremors. All sorts of things can happen because the nervous system feels like it is under intense life threat. This is the nature of traumatic memory. I've described it before in other videos. So he's got this tremendous wish to give up the drink, but he's also got experience of trying to do that, which has led him into hospital and been traumatic in itself. And so there's a real fear around giving up. And so all the suggestions that they give him are really not tenable. And a trauma-informed view sees that the drink is the solution. It's a very bad one. It's a very dysfunctional and damaging one. And it certainly isn't anything I'd recommend. But if you understand why people drink or inject themselves or harm themselves as a solution to intense pain, it's more understandable. And to really deal with that addiction, you have to go back to the root cause of what is causing the intolerable emotional pain. And so luckily in the program, in the final person he sees a psychiatrist. Actually, he sees two psychiatrists. The first one I didn't have high hopes for. He seemed to be probably more into the drug aspect of psychiatry. But the second one he sees is finally somebody who mentions trauma, the word trauma, and tells him about the nature of childhood trauma, and that it isn't benign and it isn't forgotten because it's so long ago, that the body remembers it. And although there are many reasons for why somebody might suffer bipolar disorder, and some of them are genetic and some of them are to do with lifestyle, that the overwhelming reason he suffers from this condition is because of what he suffered at age 8. And that part of his denial of that, and his guilt around talking about it, and his shame about mentioning and being self-indulgent when he mentions it, is due to the shame induced by that event itself. And no doubt the abuser probably said to him, "You mustn't tell." So he was always given that instruction. And that's absorbed by a child. It's absorbed as truth, that this is something they must not talk about. And if they do, they will cause others pain. And so you become filled with a feeling of shame. And so it does feel self-indulgent. But actually what you're doing to your body then to punish yourself, these feelings, is part of the syndrome. It's part of having had trauma. And when the psychiatrist explains this to Tony, you will see his face softens, because for the first time in his life, somebody has explained this isn't his fault. He's not making it up. And actually, it's healable when you attack the root cause. Now, I don't know what happened subsequently because the program doesn't go into whether he followed up on that meeting. I hope he does. Because trauma-informed therapy is very, very different to just drugging the effects of the trauma. It's root cause medicine. It's looking at what initially happened to change the brain of that person. Because remember, when you're 8, or any age under, sort of 7, 8, 9, your brain is still very immature. It has an emotional aspect, the limbic brain, and it has the brain stem, which is all about survival and reflexes. But it doesn't have much in the way of integration with the cortex, which is still developing. It doesn't actually finish developing until 24, 25. And so the brain isn't fully integrated. It only has these basic responses of threat, and it can only do one of 2 or 3 things. If there is overwhelming threat present, it can either fight, run or flee, or in some cases, if help is not available and you can't garner help, to actually shut down the whole body and become dissociative and leave your body effectively because it's too painful to stay in it. And these reflexive responses can become habitual whenever you're triggered in later life by events in your life. Say a relationship breaks down, or you get ill for some reason, or you have an accident. Car accidents are often very big triggers for this, and we see this a lot in whiplash syndrome, for instance. So the brain has reflexive responses which become hardwired in. They're not actually hardwired, they can be changed, but they feel hardwired because they're so quick. And so in order to change those responses, we have to engender safety relationally. So what Tony didn't have, and what a lot of abused people or a lot of traumatized people don't have, is someone or somewhere to feel safe, to be heard, to have their experience witnessed, when your experience is witnessed, you don't have to hold it yourself any longer. And that changes your physiology, because then you can actually release this sympathetic and sometimes freeze response and start coming into a different nervous system balance, where you can actually take on joy, creativity, vulnerability, play, connection with other human beings. And so it was a very profound documentary. It made me very angry at times because of the lack of trauma-informed approach. But I just wanted to make a comment that trauma is very common. It's not just abused people, it's people who grew up with attachment trauma, which is even more common. People who didn't get what they needed as children in some way or another. But it is healable when you know what you're doing. And you know, there are a lot of trauma-informed therapists out there now who actually work like I do, through the body's responses, through the emotional responses, and helping to change those to more adaptive physiology. Anyway, I hope that's given you hope, and I hope it's made you want to look at the programme with new eyes, maybe if you've already seen it. Thank you for listening. If you like this material, please comment and subscribe. Bye for now.